Welcome to this Muscle Matters 2021 online seminar on myotonic dystrophy. My name is Rob Burley. I'm Director of Campaigns, Care and Support at Muscular Dystrophy UK. Building on the success of our 2020 Muscle Matters series, we've taken account of your feedback, and the Muscle Matters seminars will now become a regular feature in our calendar. We hope they don't replace our live events, and that when we can all come together again, we do that as well, but they will certainly continue to run alongside those events. You've told us that the seminars are helpful and informative, accessible and easy to attend, and they're a great way to bring the community together. So we're delighted we're able to run the series again. So over the next 12 months, we'll run 2 or 3 seminars per month, focusing on a range of general and condition-specific topics. They'll include sessions that you told us you found the most useful on things like research, practical and financial support, and managing your condition. And each seminar will include an opportunity for questions and answers, which I'll explain in a second. Important to note that our helpline remains available to anyone affected by muscle wasting conditions, and do please contact us if you have any questions or are in need of support. The helpline is available on 0800 652 6352, or you can email info@musculardystrophyuk.org, and those details are of course on our website as well. So this morning we're focusing on myotonic dystrophy, and we're very grateful to be joined by an expert panel covering a broad range of expertise on the condition. We're splitting the session into 2 parts, and we'll begin by looking at research and then move to living with and managing the condition. Some of the conditions that we cover as part of the Muscles Matter 2021 series are tied to awareness days, weeks or months. That isn't the case with today's session, but I'm pleased to say that there will, for the first time this year, be an International Myotonic Dystrophy Awareness Day, which is scheduled for the 15th of September. So far, 36 organisations around the world have committed to take part, including Muscular Dystrophy UK, and that's with a view to bringing the global community together to raise awareness in healthcare, pharmaceutical industries, researchers and policymakers, as well as to reach out to people living with the condition and their carers. The initiative is being led by the Myotonic Dystrophy Federation in the United States, and you can find out more at myotonic.org. So before we begin, I think the final bit of housekeeping, with a note on how you can ask questions and make comments throughout the session. So we've had many questions submitted in advance, which we'll seek to cover later as we go through the morning, but we'd also like to incorporate some live input, and to do that we'll be using the Q&A function. So please type your question or comment and we will feed them into the discussion. To help us manage the technical side of the event, we won't be calling on questioners to ask their questions directly, and any questions we don't manage to cover or we don't know the answers to, we'll seek to answer either through the website or get back to you individually. And a final reminder that we're recording the session and that it will be made available over the next few days. So to start us off this morning, I'm delighted to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Kate Adcock, our Director of Research and Innovation, who will introduce our research speakers and then chair that part of this morning's session. So Kate, over to you.
Thank you, Rob, and good morning to everyone. It's great to be back in the swing of the Muscles Matters series again. So I'm going to introduce our 3 research speakers this morning, and then there will be some presentations, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions and answers. So first of all, I'd love to introduce Dr. Judith Sleeman, who is Senior Lecturer in Developmental Cell Biology at the University of St Andrews. Judith has a BSc in Cellular Molecular Pathology from the University of Bristol and a PhD in Stem Cell Biology from the University of Edinburgh. Following postdoctoral research, she was awarded the prestigious Royal Society University Fellowship and has been at the University of St Andrews since 2007. Judith's key research interests lie in the physical organisation of some of the fundamental processing mechanisms in mammalian cells and the impact of this, and when things go wrong, on human diseases, which include myotonic dystrophy. After her, we'll hear from Dr. Chris Turner, who's consultant neurologist at the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery at Queen Square in London. Chris graduated from the University of Oxford and undertook his clinical training in Oxford and many hospitals in London. He was awarded a Wellcome Trust Clinical Research Training Fellowship in 2000 to carry out his PhD research in Huntington's disease, and became a consultant at the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery and the MRC Centre for Neuromuscular Diseases at Queen Square in 2007. Chris became the Divisional Clinical Director of Queen Square Division in 2018. He has particular research and clinical interests in myotonic dystrophy and leads the Myotonic Dystrophy clinical clinic with Susan Macdonald, who you'll meet later, at Queen Square. And last but by no means least, I'd like to introduce Ben Porter, who's the Project Manager and Curator for both the UK Myotonic Dystrophy and the FSHD patient registries based at Newcastle University. Ben provides the strategic development and has overall responsibility for the registries, which includes managing engagement and communications, providing research governance and quality assurance, and many other aspects of the day-to-day operations. And you'll hear much more about the registry in a moment. So thank you, Chris, Judith, and Ben for joining us today. And without further ado, let's get through to the research talks. So as I mentioned before, we have a mixture of video and live presentations, and first of all, we'll hear from Judith. So Emma, if you could start the video, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Can anyone see anything?
No. Hang on. Technical difficulties.
It's a really great video. It's worth the wait.
Hi there, my name is Dr. Judith Sleeman. I'm a senior lecturer and principal investigator at the University of St Andrews, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about the importance of basic cell biology research, and also a little bit about the work on myotonic dystrophy that we're doing in my group at the moment. So, what is our research? I said it was basic cell biology research. This means we work in the laboratory. We don't see patients. In fact, we don't have medical qualifications. And what we want is to understand how cells work and what goes wrong at a very fundamental level in human diseases. And the longer term aim of this is to use this knowledge to help develop treatments for these diseases. So we have two projects going on in the lab at the moment. One on myotonic dystrophy type 1, and these are the people working on this project, and I have pictures here of Dr. Monica Magoni and also Dr. Selma Guliurtlu, so you can put some human faces to this work, but the others haven't sent me pictures. And we also do some work on motor neuron diseases, and Dr. Sarah Burley and Kim Morrison have sent me pictures of themselves for this, again, just so you can see the people working on this stuff. So when I talk about cell biology and cells, what exactly is a cell? We're completely made up of different types of cell. And within a cell, there are two major parts of the cell, the nucleus and the cytoplasm. And you'll probably all have heard of genes, and genes are how the cell stores its information. And genes are made up of DNA, and they're stored here within the nucleus of the cell. And within the cell, the language of DNA simply has these four letters, A, T, C, and G, which again, you might be familiar with. Now, the information is all stored in the nucleus as DNA, but the thing that does most of the work in the cell is proteins. So proteins, there are lots of different proteins in the cell, and these are what do most of the work. And many of these are found in the cytoplasm. And so to get from the instructions on the DNA down to the proteins that are doing the work in the cytoplasm, the cell uses this intermediate molecule here called RNA. And this occurs in two forms. So you have a long form of RNA within the nucleus, which is a direct copy of all of the instructions, so all of these A, T, C's and G's from the DNA into RNA within the nucleus. And then within the nucleus, this RNA is shortened and it's processed, and it has bits cut out of it and modifications made to it. And this is termed RNA processing. And Once the RNA is fully processed, you can see here this molecule here, mRNA. This is messenger RNA. And the messenger RNA is what is taken out of the nucleus into the cytoplasm and then ferried about to the various different regions of the cytoplasm where it's needed to make proteins to then do the work in the cell. So RNA forms messengers that can communicate between the nucleus and the cytoplasm of the cell. And we work largely on RNA in the lab. Okay. So how are these things moved around in the cell? In the cytoplasm, the cell tends to move things around in things called membrane-bound vesicles. And you can kind of think of these a bit like plastic bags. So I've got 3 little plastic bags of sweets down here. And you can imagine if you've got different types of sweets that you want to go to different places, you bag them up just like they're bagged up here. Take one off to one place, one off to another place. When it gets there, open the bag, release the contents, and your sweets are there available to be used, I guess, eaten in different parts of the cell. So that happens a lot in the cytoplasm. In the nucleus, though, there are no membranes once you're inside the nucleus. And so the nucleus uses liquid-like droplets to organize all of the DNA and RNA and protein that are within the nucleus of the cell. And you can kind of describe this as being a bit like a very complicated lava lamp. So if you remember these, but they're still around now, but they were certainly very big in the 60s and 70s. And with these, you have different types of oil that don't mix together, but they form instead these little droplets and larger droplets in the base oil, which is usually a different color. And that's kind of how the nucleus organizes things. So in myotonic dystrophy type 1, the actual problem at a genetic level is that a gene called DMPK has a huge long repeat of CTG over and over again in the 3 letters out of the 4 that you can have in DNA. You get CTG, 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 CTG. And this causes a problem for the cell because this RNA with the repeats in isn't processed properly and it isn't exported properly out to the cytoplasm. And so what it does is it forms large clumps or foci within the nucleus of the cell. So you can see the nucleus of the cell here outlined in blue, and these are the clumps of RNA. This is looking down on a cell from above, and then these here are 2 side views of the same cell. And this is from a new model that we've made where we can switch on the repeats by applying an antibiotic to the cells, and we can then see these clumps in living cells. And we can see them moving and really get an idea of what's going on with these clumps. So why might these clumps of RNA cause problems? You know, what's the issue with them being there? And I showed you the images of lava lamps before and tried to explain that things within the nucleus are organized as kind of liquid-like droplets. And this is a selection of images here. That the large one in the middle here shows 4 different structures within the nucleus of the cell, but here on the left there are 3 different types of structure, and on the right here 3 other types of structure within the nucleus of the cell. And all of these structures are vitally important for making sure that gene expression works properly, so that the cell can accurately get that information that's stored on the DNA to where it needs to be used in the rest of the cell. So if you can imagine, you know, you've got a great big clump of CTG repeat RNA maybe over here. This is going to cause a problem for the cell in organizing its use of its genetic information. And on the next slide, I have a movie of 2 nuclei from our new cell line. And there's one at the top here. Hopefully you can make out, it'll depend on the contrast of your screen, I guess. And there's another one down here, but you should be able to see these 2 very bright foci, one at the top and one at the bottom. And these are those clumps of RNA that are associated with DM1. And I'll just run the movie. And the movie is taken 1 frame every 2 minutes over just over an hour. And you can see that the cells are trying to exit stage left, because that's what cells like to do when you try and image them. But what I want to convey to you with this is the dynamic nature of these foci within the nucleus. They're not just static, they're not just sitting there, they're moving around. And if you can imagine that the cell at the same time is trying to, you know, use all of its liquid droplet-like structures to organize getting the information from the DNA and then making the RNA, processing the RNA, and then exporting it into the cytoplasm with these foci wriggling around, getting in the way. You can imagine how this will be a problem for the nucleus. And we're starting to see changes in some of the other structures within the nucleus in our new model of DM1. Okay, so I told you this was just in the nucleus. It turns out the liquid-like droplets are also important in the cytoplasm, particularly when the cells are under stress. So if we apply a drug to stress them, or if they're low on oxygen. And what happens when cells are under stress is that they form a liquid-like droplet called a stress granule in the cytoplasm. And this forms containing messenger RNA molecules, and it's thought to be to keep them safe while the cell's under stress. And then once the stress is removed from the cell, these stress granules then disappear and disassemble, and the messenger RNAs can go off and be used by the cell in the cytoplasm. And this is just a graph that's from a paper we're hoping to publish very soon. And this is again using our DM1 model. And these are the cells here with the CTG repeats in them. And these are the cells without the repeats. And this is the time that it takes for stress granules to form when we throw basically arsenic on the cells. And you can see that with the repeats present in the cell, with these clumps of RNA in the nuclei, it takes a lot longer, so more than twice as long, for the cells to respond to the stress and to form these stress granules to keep their messenger RNA safe. So overall then, we have evidence that the presence of the faulty RNA associated with myotonic dystrophy type 1 causes problems with liquid-like droplets that are needed for the cell to organize gene expression in the nucleus and also in the cytoplasm. So I'd like just to end with some examples of the importance of basic cell biology research, because I know it can all seem very abstract. I mean, the cells take longer to respond to stress, and we've got these little things moving about in the nucleus, but so what? So an example that's very current at the moment is for spinal muscular atrophy, which is an inherited childhood motor neuron disease. One of the two new treatments for that, called Spinraza, corrects faulty processing of messenger RNA from the gene that's involved in SMA, which is called survival of motor neurons. Now, splicing, which is one of the types of RNA processing that happens in the nucleus, was discovered in the 1970s as a basic cell biology research observation. And the initial observation was simply that you have these long RNAs in the nucleus, and you have these little short RNAs in the cytoplasm. And you could easily have shrugged your shoulders and said, well, so what? But it turns out that splicing is really important for the way the cell uses its genetic information. And it's been utilized to come up with this treatment for spinal muscular atrophy. And I guess maybe a bit more for the future, the CRISPR gene editing technology that you probably have heard about in the news over the last few years. This was developed from a system that bacteria use to protect themselves against viruses. So really quite an abstract concept, you know, bacteria get infected by viruses just as we do. And CRISPR gene editing has all been developed from the way in which bacteria respond to these viral infections. So hopefully a couple of examples there of how basic cell biology research has been used to affect and develop new therapies. And hopefully there'll be more to come in the future. So I'll just stop the share now of the screen and just thank you very much for your attention. Okay, bye.
Thank you so much, Judith. That was fascinating, and I will forever think of lava lamps in a completely different way. It was really useful kind of analogy. So following you, we'd like to turn to Dr. Chris Turner. We've got the slides, Chris. Are you happy for us to drive them? You just channel your inner Chris Whitty, and we'll, with the next slide, please, and we'll move them on for you.
Exactly. Thanks, Kate. Well, thank you very much for inviting me today to speak, and it's great to see the participants here. I'm not sure if I'm meant to see them, but I can actually see the names, so it's really good to see some familiar names So look, I'm going to talk not just about clinical research, but also about trials. It's something that I get asked a lot about, and the landscape in clinical trials in myotonic dystrophy has certainly changed quite for the better over the past 5 years. And in a way, the pandemic hasn't served those trials well, but I will try and give you a whistle-stop tour of what's going on at the moment and the exciting projects that are being driven by collaborations between research institutions, clinical institutions, and the pharmaceutical industry to derive a treatment for myotonic dystrophy. Okay, this is just a picture of where I work in the MRC Centre, if any of you come to London, and we're very lucky to have this centre. Just move on to the next slide, please. So, of course, ISIS was a pharmaceutical company who derived really the first major breakthrough trial in what's called antisense therapy to treat the underlying genetic abnormality. And there was huge expectations that this would deliver a few years ago now, treatment for myotonic dystrophy that would have tangible benefits for patients. Next slide, please. One name change later to Ionis by January 2017, and sadly the reality came home that this new antisense treatment didn't have the effect on patients that it was hoped for, and that brought a lot of disappointment to the community, and that's understandable, and you can see that in this message from the company here. To doctors and researchers, it wasn't fully unexpected. And actually, there were many positives that came out of that trial, and many things that we learned, which have allowed us to go and the myotonic dystrophy community to step forward in looking at other new treatments. Next slide, please. So the question is, what do we need? How do we prepare ourselves for all these future trials? And we'll go through the in a minute, and Ben's going to talk about the registry, but I should say that being on the registry is really key to engaging in a clinical trial. What this does is it allows for those who wish to conduct a trial to access people, those individuals which are appropriate for that clinical trial, and contact them via third party anonymously so that you can decide whether you take part in the trial or not. And Ben Porter and the team have done a fantastic job at leading this over the last few years. And in itself, it's generating data and information that we're learning from. I think this figure now, Ben will tell you, is up to about 750, 800 people throughout the UK, which is a fantastic resource. And what that does, you may say, well, what's the value of that? What that does, it sends a message to the international community that the UK is ready to participate in clinical trials. And certainly that message is loud and clear, and has allowed us a place at the table right at the start of these clinical trials and developing phase 1A, 1B, 2A clinical trials. Next slide, please. So where do you do these? So we're very lucky over the past 7 years at Queen Square to have the Neuromuscular Complex Care Centre. Some of you on the call may have been there. It looks very smart and new in this photo. Very important people opened it, including Professor Ros Quinn-Livin, who many of you will notice. Sadly, this is now actually an emergency stroke unit, which we had to convert it to. But what I can tell you is that going forward in the next year, we're expanding into a new space in the Neuromuscular Complex Care Centre at Queen Square. It'll be a 9-bedded unit. There'll be over twice the footprint, so it won't be so cramped. And we're really looking forward to the new development of a centre. And what these centres allow is they allow us not only to provide care to patients, but also to bring patients in for clinical trials. So you heard discussion around from Judith around Spinraza for SMA. So that's where SMA treatments will be delivered on the Neuromuscular Complex Care Unit. So the studies and trials in myotonic dystrophy will be conducted on the Neuromuscular Complex Care Centre at Queen Square. It just allows all the resources, all the expertise to be concentrated on one centre. So hopefully the next time I'll show this slide, there'll be a brand new picture of a 9-bedded unit in our new Neuromuscular Complex Care Centre at Queen Square. Next slide, please, Kate. Okay. If you want a review of what we do, this is one review that I wrote with the great David Hilton Jones a number of years ago, and I think it's free online. There's various other reviews to look at, but it sets out a premise of what we can measure and what we can support going forward in terms of clinical surveillance to support the development of clinical trials. Next slide, please. And we've met in the UK, a number of us, over many years to get to this point, to develop a standards of care which clinical trials will be measured against in terms of clinical endpoints. And certainly that's ongoing work over the past 10 years. Next slide, please, Kate. And we've developed surveillance standards. Many of you will have seen the MDUK clinical surveillance cards, which allow you in your wallet, a wallet size, sort of credit card size bit of paper that folds 6 ways, with basically a rapid summary of what to look out for in myotonic dystrophy if you go into A&E or doctors. And basically that's been translated into a greater scale to create clinical endpoints and care standards. Next slide, please. So this then led to the development of PhenoDM1, and I'm sure some of you were part of this clinical trial, which wasn't a treatment trial, it was a clinical observation trial or a natural history study. And you may say, well, what's the point of doing a trial without treatments? The point is we get to study what happens to individuals with myotonic dystrophy over several years. For the PhenoDM1 study, we had 3 time points, and Charlotte and Susan and Jodi and others were involved in collecting the data and supporting patients. And that then gives us markers of what we can measure when we come to give a treatment to compare whether there's a positive or a negative or a neutral effect of a new drug. Incredibly important. And out of PhenoDM1, next slide, please, Kate. We supported the development of guidelines internationally. So this is a group of us meeting in the basement of a Florida hotel with me cross-armed at the back, looking very excited to develop those care standards. So we know how to treat patients. We know what clinical markers to use to show improvement with drugs. Next slide, please. And this is some of the guidance. You can access this free online. Next slide, please. But let's come to the meat of the discussion, which is about what current studies and trials are available. There's several good sites. The MDUK site's very good. The Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation website is excellent. And if you type MDUK or Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation, you'll find plenty of information on what the current studies and trials are. Next slide, please. So, out of the PhenoDM1 study, it has to be said, we realized that there probably needed to be an international effort, almost like a dress rehearsal for the subsequent clinical trials, which will take place with drugs. And of course, the Americans are very good at this and could bring their might to the table and organizational skills. So you can see all the centers there, including ourselves, at the bottom there, last but not least, at UCL in London. And all of these sites are now engaged at an international level to generate the next phase of PhenoDM1, which is called NDM1. So you'll see at the end of the title at the top in green, NDM1. That's the name of the latest trial study, which is aiming to recruit around 800-900 patients from throughout the world, which will then, you can, as I said, you can think of it as like a dress rehearsal before we bring in the drugs. So the next question, what are the drugs? Where are they coming from? Next slide, please, Kate. So Dyn Therapeutics is a company which has brought, you can read what's available there on their website. This is all on the website, so I'm not delivering any industrial secrets here, but essentially it's an antibody with a bit of DNA attached to it, and the antibody allows it to get into muscle cells and get into other cells and deliver its payload, deliver its package of antisense therapy to the right areas. And that's the technology. And this is all, as I said, available online. You can go away and read about it on the Dyn Therapeutics site. And you can see myotonic dystrophy right there at the top. They're very close to developing patient treatment trials. We're just at the cusp of bringing that forward. Of course, the events of the last year have stalled it slightly, but please be expectant. This is happening, and I'm sure you'll see this over the next few years. Next slide, please. So another company called Avidity are also bringing a very similar technology, this antibody that brings the antisense genetic treatment to the right cells at the right time. And they are very close to bringing this to clinical trials. And those who are involved in the Myotonic Dystrophy Clinical Research Network throughout the world are engaged with these companies to bring these drugs to clinical trials, phase 2A clinical trials for our patients throughout the world. Next slide, please. But there's other companies, Biogen, Ionis. So Ionis was that company that brought that very first drug to the table. They're certainly interested. And you can visit engagement seminars. So please register, go on the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation website. They are hosting these seminars. You get to speak to the researchers. You get to hear what's happening. They've recorded them. You can access old videos of conversations with these drug development teams. And this is a shout out. It's a bit late now, the 7th of May. You've missed that one, but go on to the next slide, Kate. Oh, I just wanted to make a shout out for AMO Pharma. So some of you may have been involved in the AMO Pharma study to date. That's purely for congenital myotonic dystrophy. It's a multi-center trial, the Newcastle Hay. It's had a bit of a rocky road, but I want to shout out because I think congenital myotonic dystrophy doesn't get the attention it probably deserves. A really difficult disease, and this company, AMO Pharma, are driven to drive therapies for children and also eventually, hopefully, adults with congenital onset myotonic dystrophy. So look out for AMO Pharma. Next slide, please, Kate. So these were the up and coming talks. You can see, actually, they're the past talks that you can see from Dyn and AMO Pharma, another company, Expansion Therapeutics, and Biogen, Ionis. You can watch recordings talking about the research, but they also have a, next slide, please, Kate. They also have a pipeline of other discussions. This is a slide looking, I think, from the MDUK. It's a fantastic slide looking at the trajectory of the number of companies. So all the column on the left there is all the companies that are involved in generating products. The product is in the next column, the second column. And you can see there are lots of companies. Over the past 5 years, the landscape has completely changed. Following that original Ionis trial, following the success of Spinraza, the drug companies have been heavily engaged in looking at treatments for myotonic dystrophy. And these bars just shows how far along the pathway there are. And you can see these include AMO Pharma, Lupin, a company that's looking at mixilotine for the treatment of myotonia. But then we come down to Expansion Therapeutics, all at phase 1. But by now, a lot of them are entering into phase 2, which is those trials involving not just healthy human volunteers, but also patient. Next slide, please, Kate. And I've come to the end. Happy to take any questions when it comes to Q&A, but that's a whistle-stop tour of where we are. In conclusion, it has been slightly stalled, clinical trials over the past year and a half for obvious reasons, but you can see all the companies that are involved, lots of excitement about genetic treatments. We're going to have to be patient over the next 5 years as we bring those treatments to clinical trial in a multi-centered, multinational fashion, and out of that, hopefully we'll have a treatment or several treatments which will be applicable for people with myotonic dystrophy. So really exciting times to look forward to. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you very much, Chris. I must just mention that it's my colleague Emma who's been driving the slides so brilliantly, but thank you for giving me the credit.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you, Kate.
So finally, just moving over to the registries, we'll move to Ben Porter, who again, thank you, Ben, for sending us a video. And Emma, if you can do the magic with the video again, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, MDUK, for giving me the opportunity to present today at the Muscle Matters meeting. So my name is Ben Porter and I run the UK Myotonic Dystrophy Patient Registry. So what is a patient registry? So a patient registry is a research database that contains information about individuals who are affected by a condition or a genetic mutation. So they're really, really important in the rare disease space in the development of new therapies. So the UK Myotonic Dystrophy Patient Registry collects clinical and genetic information about both DM1 and DM2 in the UK. So patients complete a questionnaire on a secure online portal. It's then combined with doctor verified clinical and genetic information once you've selected a neurologist during the registration process. So on the right hand side here, you can see the landing page on the registry website. So why join the registry? Well, the registry can help with various different things. So the registry can help identify participants for clinical trials and research studies. It can also help in the development of standards of care, helping improve the care that people actually receive. It can support various research questions that doctors and scientists may have, again, supporting various different aspects of the condition. It can also contribute to what's known as the natural history of the disease, so understanding how the disease progresses and what the disease course looks like, or how it might be altered by treatments. And it can also provide a link to the research community. So it allows people who are registered on the registry to receive information such as newsletters, research updates, updates on standards of care, new drugs in development, etc. So how do you join the UK Myotonic Dystrophy Patient Registry? So the registry can be accessed online via the registry website. So patients themselves or caregivers can initiate registration online. So again, this is the little part of the registry where you can click on register. Then you'll enter basic demographic information such as your name, date of birth, contact details. They're all collected at the registration stage. Again, on the left hand side you can see some of this and what it looks like. You then provide informed consent, which is used essentially before you complete any of the registry questionnaires. Then also be asked to complete, or not complete, select your doctor from a list of affiliated doctors. This is so that the doctor can complete what's known as the doctor's form, which includes various clinical and genetic information. If your doctor doesn't appear on here, feel free to reach out to me and let me know, and I can try and contact them to get them on the registry. And then this all allows kind of researchers, academics, patient organisations, pharma and biotech companies to make inquiries into the registry. So once we have your consent, this allows us to share information about their new studies or projects with you. Also, if anybody wants patient data, we ensure that patient data is not shared unless it's in the format of being de-identified and aggregated. So that's usually just various key numbers or summaries of the data. We don't share any personal information with third parties. So the use of the registry in research. So the registry is able to support a wide range of researchers, doctors, pharmaceutical, biotech companies, and various patient organisations. At present, the registry supported approximately 30 different inquiries from these groups since 2012, so since the registry started. But it's not limited to promoting clinical trials and research studies, promoting surveys and providing de-identified data. The registry possibilities are kind of endless. So specific examples of the registry being used in research. So back in 2015, 2016, the registry helped support recruitment to a research study known as PhenoDM1. So this study aimed to do a comprehensive analysis known as a deep phenotype of a population of myotonic dystrophy type 1 patients to better understand the disease, but also get ready for upcoming treatments that were in the pipeline. So from 213 participants who took part in the study across clinical sites in London and Newcastle, approximately 40% were recruited to the registry. Then more recently, in 2019, the registry helped support recruitment to some focus groups and interviews for the patient preference study known as PREFER. So there were 67 patients or carers who self-reported interest in this study, with almost 3/4 coming from the registry. And then for the first phase of the project, 49 patients actually took part. Then the final example, so the registry's helped, again, fairly recently, it's helped support recruitment for a survey on dysphagia or swallowing difficulties in neuromuscular diseases, which was developed by the University College London NHS Foundation Trust. So the registry helped circulate a survey on the specific swallowing difficulties to caregivers and patients, which the aim of this was to essentially understand how service delivery in the UK could be optimised. And of the DM participants, 3/4 heard about the survey through the registry, which is fantastic for the registry. And then here's just some new sections that I've been able to include on the registry website. So to keep us, transparent with everything that we've been involved in, I've been able to collate all of the publications that we've helped support the registry. So be that registry inquiries or publications that have originated specifically from the registry. So you can find this page on the link below there. And then also I've been collating all of the registry inquiries that we've supported. So as I mentioned before, there's been about 30 registry inquiries that we've supported since 2012. So on this new page on the registry website, you can see all of these, a bit of information about the actual inquiry itself and how we helped support recruitment to this, where it's been available. And we continue to strive to get this information from researchers. We want people to use the registry, but at the same time, we want to be able to measure the impact that the registry actually has in research as well, and get feedback from the researchers on, results, so we can share it with the registry. I've also been collating the drugs that are in development for myotonic dystrophy as well. So from my background in Horizon Scan, I've been able to include this new page on the registry website, which I think I've been collating now for about 1.5 years. It's been shared with various patient organisations around the world, but it's constantly added to and updated. So feel free to check this out to see what's in development from the very, very early stages all the way up to clinical trials, because there is a lot of interest in the space right now, and it's continued to increase from both pharma as well as academics. So to conclude, patient registries themselves, as I mentioned at the start, they're very versatile resource. They can be used in all sorts of different ways. I mean, typically they're used for clinical trial recruitment or study recruitment, but they can be used in whichever way. It's all about finding out what researchers actually want to use the registry for, to see how you can help them. If you have the opportunity to register with one, of course, I would highly recommend this. I'm slightly biased. For new clinical trials and research studies, they often appear on clinical trial registers such as clinicaltrials.gov or the EU Clinical Trial Register. But by being involved in a patient registry, there is actually potential to be notified by a much wider range of projects and what appear on these registers. I'd like to say thank you to Dr. Chiara Marini Bertolo, who is the principal investigator of the registry and my boss, and all of the researchers, doctors, companies, patient organisations, patients and caregivers who've helped support the registry over the past 9 years. I've been in this role for about 2.5 years, but I've gotten to know lots of these different groups really well, and it's been absolutely great. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me at the email below, and thank you very much for your time. Cheers now. Bye-bye.
Super. Thank you very much, Ben, and thank you also to Chris and to Judith. We have time for a few questions, which I think would be great. We've had a few come in ahead of time, and some have been coming through on the Q&A set functionality. If I could maybe start with one that we had sent prior to today. Someone's written to say that if they're wondering if there's any research or clinical trials for patients who have both non-dystrophic myotonia and small fibre neuropathy, as they have been diagnosed with both. Now, so obviously that's slightly different from myotonic dystrophy, but I wonder whether, Chris, you are aware of any trials or research that are kind of going on looking at individuals who've got perhaps more than one diagnosis. Chris.
Oh, hi, Kate. I think I picked that up. It was non-dystrophic myotonia and small fibre neuropathy. So 2 independent conditions, non-dystrophic myotonia being a pure genetic disorder of causing myotonia, the feature of myotonic dystrophy as well. There are clinical trials with non-dystrophic myotonia. The National Centre is in our department. I'm not directly involved in it, but there are trials looking at mixillatine and other drugs to help treat the myotonia of non-dystrophic myotonia. The best person to ask would probably be to get in contact with the team at the National who deal with non-dystrophic myotonia, Deepa Rajarayan and Mike Hanna and their colleagues. So that's from that angle. Small fibre neuropathy is really difficult. There is David Bennett in Oxford has a strong interest in small fibre neuropathy. Bobby Bhattacharjee, who now has come to do some sessions in our pain unit at UCLH, but is principally a neurologist based out of the Royal Free, is interested. I'll be honest with you, I don't know what the latest trials are in small fibre neuropathy. I'm sure they exist. Sometimes clinicaltrials.org is a good place to start, or go to a patient site similar, but there must be a similar site for small fibre neuropathy who could support them, I'd suspect. I think that's partly answered the question.
Thank you, thank you. And a question that's come up in the Q&A, which I know, Chris, you've sort of answered directly, but perhaps for the benefit of everyone, and I realise that it is a bit of a how long is a piece of string kind of a question, but how soon are there likely to be trials using drugs in the UK, do you think?
Well, that's interesting. Before the pandemic, if you asked the drug companies, we would already be in the middle of several treatment trials as we speak. Of course, there's, it's in the interest of the drug companies to perhaps advance that date, even without the COVID pandemic. We're very close at entering phase 1B, possibly 2A clinical trials, particularly with Avidity. I know it's really frustrating and everyone wants an answer and a timeline. The best I can probably provide, Kate, is probably in the next few years, the treatment trials will start in earnest. I know that is a huge...
Can you say the time?
The trouble is there are so... well, that was probably planned, wasn't it? In the next few years, I think in the next few years, there will be the start of phase 1B studies. I know that Avidity are looking at the first in-human non-myotonic dystrophy. So the first phase of a clinical trial is giving the drug to people who haven't got the disease to check its safety and tolerability and whether it gets to the right place. And those with a couple of the drug companies are due to start soon. So I look, realistically, I think it's going to be a few years. It may be a bit sooner, a bit longer, depending on what happens to COVID. But it is happening. That's the reassurance. It is all happening.
Brilliant. Thank you. We've just had a question in about the, myotonic dystrophy affects multiple parts of the body, multiple different systems within the body. And what treatments are likely to be available from the development of new drugs? Will they be helping, for example, with daytime sleepiness, with muscle weakness? Are they going to sort of solve everything, or are they going to be sort of looking at particular different aspects of the condition? Again, Chris, I'm sorry, it's to you.
No, that's absolutely fine. So you're exactly right. So mixillatine, for instance, which has been developed by Lupin, who has the license now, is specifically looking at treatment of the myotonia, and they were due to enter a trial in myotonic dystrophy that was on the cusp of starting, and then the COVID pandemic, Lupin Pharmaceuticals have reassessed the trial. They now have a long-acting formulation. We were site ready for that trial, but they've pulled back, the company, and they want to trial a long-acting version of mixillatine for site-specific treatment of the myotonia. In terms of the genetic drugs, we simply don't know. I mean, it's aimed at treating everything, but the big question and the huge unknown is, will it reverse clinical features of myotonic dystrophy? Will it stabilize, or will it actually improve? It's a complete unknown. This is completely new territory. Will it only help the heart and the muscle and not help the brain and the cataract? We fundamentally don't know. This is absolutely new territory. The treatments in animal models and cell models suggest it should treat a lot of those systems, but as we learned from the Ionis trial and why there was development of the antibody mixed with the antisense treatment, it was getting into some tissues, partially into some tissues not at all. For instance, the Ionis drug didn't get into the brain at all. So it may be that the drug would work if it got to the right tissues, but can only get to the skeletal muscle. But to me, that would be a victory if we could just treat the skeletal muscle, then think of other ways of getting that drug to other organs. In terms of drugs to treat specific problems, I think Peter Ashley and others have mentioned the AMO drug, which may help muscles and brain. And probably is you could see on your chart there, Kate, from the MDUK, is most advanced in terms, apart from the Ionis drug, in terms of where it is in terms of phasing. That was delayed and pulled back. It's really difficult, but that may specifically help skeletal muscle and the brain. I think the takeaway message is that we fundamentally don't know. We're hoping that these genetic treatments will treat all organs, but there's so many factors: how it will penetrate the organ, will it actually work on specific organs, lots of unknowns, but exciting times again, Kate.
Super. Well, that's a really great place for us, I think, to pause the research questions. There are one or two other questions that have come in. We'll try and weave them into the discussion later, but I'm very conscious that time is marching on, and we've already learned so much. And thank you, all of you, to Chris, to Ben, and to Judith. I believe that you're all going to stay on as well to the remainder of the session, just to be part of the next part of living with myotonic dystrophy. And I will hand back to my colleague Rob now. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Kate. And yeah, huge thanks to you, Chris, Ben, and Judith. That was a fascinating session. And as Kate says, we'll maybe be able to come back to some of the unanswered research questions before we get to midday. But I think now I'd like to welcome our three more panelists who are going to speak to us for a bit about managing the condition and living with myotonic dystrophy. So I'll introduce them all now, and then I'll ask each of them to speak in turn for a few minutes before we move into a discussion and Q&A. So we're absolutely delighted that Susan Macdonald is here. Susan is a neuromuscular clinical nurse specialist at the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery in London. You may have noticed a pattern developing in our speakers today, a common thread. She specialises in muscle conditions, including myotonic dystrophy. She attends consultant clinics and also visits patients on the Neuromuscular Complex Care Centre during admission, as well as running a telephone clinic to check in with patients in between their consultant follow-up, and is a point of contact for patients and carers to discuss changes in their clinical condition or accessing other services and support. Charlotte Massey is a physiotherapist specialising in neuromuscular disease and respiratory management in neuromuscular disease. She's also at the Queen Square Centre for Neuromuscular Diseases. She has a special interest in myotonic dystrophy and has been involved in national and international research. And her main area of interest are cough augmentation, respiratory management, and exercise. And we've had a few questions about exercise, so that's useful. I'm sure they'll be coming your way. She runs a specialist clinic on cough and secretion management in neuromuscular disease. And Jodi Allen is a senior speech and language therapist at the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery. She specialises in the diagnosis and management of swallowing and motor speech disorders in patients living with neurological or neuromuscular diseases. Jodi is part funded by the National Institute for Health Research, where she is currently undertaking research related to swallowing difficulties in neuromuscular diseases. So a very eminent panel with a lot of experience, and I'll turn to you straight away and ask you all to say a few words before going into the Q&A. So Susan, I think we've already picked up from some of the research questions just how broad the impact of the condition can be. Could you start us off with a bit of an overview of your role as a clinical nurse specialist and how you support people living with myotonic dystrophy?
Yeah, so as you kind of touched on already, my role is kind of to be a point of contact for patients and their families living with muscle conditions, including myotonic dystrophy. So I meet patients in clinic with Dr. Turner and visit them on the Neuromuscular Complex Care Centre, where they come in for monitoring from a multidisciplinary point of view. And I also run my own telephone clinics in between to kind of catch up with patients. It might be to monitor symptoms that we've identified during their admissions, or if we've started a new medication, just to see how they're getting on with that. And then patients and their families can contact me in the meantime as well with kind of new symptoms, change in symptoms in relation to myotonic dystrophy, if they want to discuss it with me, get any advice. And I support kind of accessing local services. So whether it be community therapy or talking therapies, whether they need an assessment from the social services for equipment or a care package. And a big thing that I help with is accessing benefits. So personal independent payments, the applications can be quite daunting. Often people apply and they don't get the outcome that they think they deserve. So I can do some supporting information letters for them to kind of help with that as well.
Thank you so much, Susan. I'm going to, as we go through these remarks, I'm going to try and knock off some of the questions that are coming in because I'm conscious of time. And we had a question from someone who's with us but emailed in advance, which covered a kind of broad range of where they could find support for specific things. And it sounds like your role, if they have access to someone in your role with their service, or indeed a care advisor, that's sort of the first point of contact. And also, I think if you don't have access to that or are unsure, if you come through to the MDUK helpline, we can let you know what is available in your area. And if there isn't someone in Susan's role in your service, then we can provide some of those answers. So hopefully that helps the person who called in on that question. Charlotte, I'm going to turn to you next. It'd be great if you could just explain a little bit about why physiotherapy is so important for adults with myotonic dystrophy and some of the key principles that physiotherapists follow when supporting people with the condition.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm Charlotte. I'm a physiotherapist and I work on the Neuromuscular Complex Care Centre. So I guess as was mentioned previously, there's so many kind of different facets to myotonic dystrophy, and I guess our main role as a physiotherapist is to try and get involved with kind of the physical aspect of it to start with. So we're kind of very keen to look at kind of muscle strength and anything we can do to support with that. So whether that be kind of strengthening exercises or things like orthotics, so devices that you can use to support if you've got things like ankle weakness, to support kind of day-to-day functions and things like walking. So that might involve thinking about whether there's any aids that can support with walking. A big part of kind of the myotonic dystrophy is often people report that they fall quite a lot, and that's a huge thing that we look at. So looking at whether there's anything from a balance point of view we can do to support with that. Are there any adaptations or anything we can suggest? And linking in really closely with our kind of community colleagues and also occupational therapists to see whether there is any equipment or anything that can be provided at home to support with kind of day-to-day functioning. Another big thing that physios are kind of quite heavily involved in is promoting exercise and activity. And I think often a lot of questions we get when people are first diagnosed is they're not sure what exercises they should do, how far they should push themselves, and at what point they should start or stop exercising. So I think that's kind of a really important role for us, and we provide that both on the Neuromuscular Complex Care Centre, and we also run kind of outpatient clinics where we can see people by video or face-to-face, just to kind of support with that and give that kind of advice. The next kind of role for the physio is we're involved in the respiratory side of myotonic dystrophy as well, and kind of working with our respiratory nurses and respiratory consultants and kind of looking from our point of view at people's cough, and anyone who's been into the NMSC will know that when you come in we do a kind of range of respiratory tests to look at kind of how your breathing is, and look at how your cough is and kind of provide any support for that, to try and prevent anything like chest infections or any kind of secondary complications from any respiratory muscle weakness.
Thanks, Charlotte. And before I sort of turn to Jodi, we had you mentioned exercise and in your remarks, and we had a specific question came in advance actually, which was whether regular exercise can help maintain muscle strength and use. And it was by someone whose wife had been told by their local GP that it wouldn't. So it sounds like there might be some sort of misconception around exercise and the importance of it, or is it down to the individual and the limits that they're able to work within?
Well, I think that I would say over the last kind of 10 to 15 years, the views on exercise in neuromuscular disease as a whole has changed significantly. So I think previously people were often told, if you've got a neuromuscular disease, we don't know what's going to happen to your muscles if you exercise, so don't do anything. And now, you know, over the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a bit more research done in the area, and what, you know, our knowledge is a little bit more. I will say that there is not extensive research done in this area whatsoever, and there's definitely a lot of questions that we still want to answer. Our recommendations for people with myotonic dystrophy is that you should still exercise. You know, we know that even people without a neuromuscular condition, if they don't exercise and use their muscles will waste. So it's important that people keep as active as possible. We are not sure on the kind of results or whether there's any risk if people exercise at a very high intensity, and by that I mean kind of really heavy weightlifting where you can only lift a weight maybe 3 times, and that's something we would suggest that people avoid. We suggest if you're doing a kind of cardiovascular type exercise that you try and keep your kind of scale of kind of a 6 out of 10. So you should feel kind of breathless and you should feel like you're exerting yourself, but you should still be able to hold a conversation while you're doing that. So you shouldn't be exercising so much that you literally can't speak if somebody asks you if you're okay. We have some kind of top tips guidelines that we give out from here on exercise. The other place that I would direct people to is the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation in America has recently, during the COVID pandemic, produced a really good guideline on how to exercise with myotonic dystrophy. And in there, it's got kind of the different types of exercise. So, you know, your cardiovascular exercise, your stretching exercises, strengthening exercises, and what to look out for. It's also got some really nice links on the back page for kind of videos and things that you can use if you're not sure about kind of how you want to exercise.
Thanks, Charlotte. That's really helpful. That sounds like a great resource that people can go to.
I can maybe try and share that on the chat.
Oh yeah, please, and we'll circulate with the feedback form as well. So a plug there for people to look out for the feedback form as well. Then I would be remiss of me not to also plug if people want to go onto the Muscle Matters 2020 videos on our YouTube channel via our website. We did a couple of sessions on seated and standing exercise with a physiotherapist last year, so that they're also a good sort of entry point to regular exercise to help. We've got plenty of other questions, but I'm going to invite Jodi to sort of speak first, if that before we sort of go further into the questions. So, Jodi, I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about the role that speech and language therapists play, and again some of the key principles that you follow.
Yes, very happy to. Thank you. So yes, I'm Jodi. I'm the speech and language therapist based at Queen Square, and I'm in a really lucky position where I get to work specifically with patients just with neuromuscular diseases, and that's not so common for speech and language therapists. So a lot of my role is about helping other speech and language therapists that don't work in specialist centres support people with rare conditions like myotonic dystrophy. But in general, the role of a speech and language therapist is to support patients with speech problems or communication problems or swallowing problems, and the swallowing aspect isn't listed in our title, so sometimes that can surprise people that we do work with eating and drinking and swallowing difficulties. So myotonic dystrophy does cause problems with speaking and swallowing, and as Charlotte was saying, we're learning a little bit more about the condition and whether we can exercise the condition a little bit more than we used to. So we are looking at what we can provide in terms of maintenance and therapy to help with speech and swallowing, which is different to what we did a few years ago. One of the biggest challenges in myotonic dystrophy is, of course, swallowing problems that cause chest infections. So food and drink, unfortunately, can go down the wrong way because of the muscle weakness. Well, we think it's the muscle weakness, and it goes down onto the lungs, and it can cause chest infections. And that's something that we want to avoid as much as we can, because we don't want people in hospital with chest infections and becoming unwell, because then that affects how well they can function with the rest of their disease. So lots of my role and some of my research is about trying to understand the swallowing problems a little bit more, so we can put things in place to try and stop the consequences. So I've got a wonderful patient advisory panel that I work with as part of my research who have myotonic dystrophy, and they tell me how important it is try and recognize the swallowing problems early and try and put things in place to try and reduce the consequences, because coughing and choking because of swallowing is not something that people want to live with day to day.
Thank you very much. That's really helpful, Jodi. So I'm going to return. I'll come to a question which I think relates to sort of swallowing, which was sent in advance, and that was from someone who has an 11-year-old grandson who has trouble swallowing and dribbling, and she's worried about his move to secondary school. He's on a treatment called glycopyrronium bromide, but she's just wondering if there's anything you could suggest to sort of help with that sort of dribbling. Does that fall under your remit as well, Jodi?
Yes, I forgot to include that one. So yes, so drooling and problems with saliva kind of fall under the speech therapy remit. And there are lots of options to help with saliva management. Some of them are behavioural, so we try and support the patient to adapt their behaviours to reduce drooling. So that depends on how well people can take on those suggestions and techniques. So they're very practical techniques, and often people will drool not because they've got too much saliva, it's just that they're either not swallowing as often or they're not swallowing as effectively as they were before. So some of the drooling and saliva management techniques are about changing behaviours, and some of our patients have little timers, depending on how old our patients are or have what access to technology they have. Some of our patients have little timers that remind them to swallow when they're doing really important things, so they don't end up drooling it. But as you've already mentioned, there are drugs that help with saliva management as well. And the way those drugs work, they tend to try and reduce the amount of saliva that people have to cope with. We have to be quite careful with those drugs because they do have side effects. And we have to remember in myotonic dystrophy that there are problems with the heart. And so we have to often clear it with the cardiologist and check that we're not going to prescribe a drug to manage and dry up saliva that then is going to have consequences on the heart. So yes, there are quite lots of things we can draw upon, and we often have to play around a little bit, and there's a toolkit that we can use as speech therapists, and we work through that toolkit kind of methodically. So I'm really happy to send out a basic advice sheet on how to manage drooling to you guys as well.
Oh yes, please. That'd be fantastic. So add that to our suite of resources at MDUK. I'm afraid it's been recorded, Jodi, so we can hold you to that at a later date. Thank you. Charlotte, Chris Turner has been co-opted himself onto our team and is answering questions in the Q&A sort of at pace. But one of the questions was around pain in hips, and actually the point he made was quite interesting in terms of making sure that you rule out other causes of pain. It may not just be a neuromuscular condition. Is that something you do as a physiotherapist, kind of working with the patient to really highlight whether what's causing the issues and whether they need further referrals onwards?
Yeah, I think that's a really important part of our job, because obviously, if somebody's got myotonic dystrophy, that doesn't say that they might not have another condition or a musculoskeletal condition that is affecting their hips, their knees, or their back or anything. So I think that's a really important part of our assessment, is to, when we're completing our assessment, trying to differentiate, what might be caused from weakness from the myotonic dystrophy and what might be something that's unrelated. You can develop kind of problems, musculoskeletal problems, sort of back pain or joint problems because of muscle weakness, and your muscles not necessarily holding your joints in the right place. So it can be that some of those things can be related to the weakness from the myotonic dystrophy, but it's important that we also consider that that it might be something unrelated, and kind of making sure we're making the right referrals and doing the right assessment to work that out.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to another question we had in advance. I think this is one for Susan and potentially Chris might want to come in as well. But it appears that there is a lot, a very complex condition, but a lot of support available. It seems that I guess a referral is a key sort of start of that journey. And it was a question around someone who'd struggled to get a referral to a neurologist from their GP. What should the pathway be? And if someone is struggling to get a referral, is it a question of, I don't know, coming to someone like MDUK to make sure they kind of can get some advice to their GP about being referred onto a service? How does someone find their way to you, Susan, in particular?
So yeah, usually the route is for the GP to refer to neurologist, or so in our case to Dr. Turner, and then when they attend his clinic, I usually try and attend clinic with him, and if I'm not there, he can give my contact details out, or he'll let me know if there's any issues. I've had some people who have had difficulty getting a referral from the GP, but if they do a bit of research and they know who they want to be referred to, that might help with the GP looking up. I think the e-referral system has been taken a bit of getting used to for the GPs to find the specific people. So I think probably just knowing if they go with the contact details, that might help.
Great, thank you. Chris, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Just to say, it's your right to ask for specialist care if the local providers can't provide that. So don't be put off.
Thank you. Very clear. But yeah, and I agree with that. I mean, interestingly, I was on a discussion yesterday around the rare disease framework and that importance of supporting GPs to make sure they do have to give a referral, and knowing how to do that is quite key. We've just had a question sort of through into the Q&A, which comes back to you, Jodi, which I think is a really good point, actually, which is that choking can be very frightening for carers as well as sort of people living with a condition. So have you any advice for how to support someone in a carer role if there is a sort of choking incident?
And that's some raised time and again, actually, and something that the advisory panel that I'm working with also has caregivers on that panel, and they tell me just how frightening it is. In fact, when we did our survey that Ben mentioned earlier, we sent out via the registry, actually it came back that caregivers were actually more frightened than the patient having the choking episode. One of the pieces of advice we always give out if we know a patient has got swallowing problems is that we routinely suggest that family members and caregivers are always trained in emergency first aid for choking. The likelihood of a severe choking event is low, especially if the advice from the speech and language therapist is followed. But it doesn't take somebody with myotonic dystrophy to have a choking event. We know that everybody's prone to choking. So yeah, we always recommend that caregivers are trained, and that we usually go to the normal kind of first aid services for that, St John's Ambulance, Red Cross. But the other thing is we provide an awful lot of education about how actually the cough is there for a reason. Coughing is actually good because your body is responding to whatever it is in the airway, and there's a difference between a true choking event where you can't breathe, and there's a difference between coughing and spluttering because something in inverted commas gone down the wrong hole. So a true choking event really needs some emergency attention, but if they're coughing and spluttering, often we encourage the patient to cough. Keep coughing because that's what your body is doing and that's the right thing to do. And we might put things in place with the physiotherapy team to help cough stronger. So there might be techniques that we teach about strong coughing. But actually, the one thing we do try to discourage is what happens socially when you're sat around a meal table. Often we've all coughed and spluttered every now and then, and your friend or your colleague or your caregiver next to you automatically goes to pat you on the back, or they give you a drink and say, have a drink. And actually the recognition is actually they've already just coughed on that drink or the food. So it's probably not best to say, oh, have a drink. And that's probably actually the least helpful thing to do at that particular time. So as is sometimes hitting someone on the back, it can really, knock whether their body's response to that coughing episode. So yeah, I think kind of to summarize, I guess, emergency first aid training is always good, and just think about the techniques and maybe agree with the person you're sitting with. What's the most helpful thing to do in those situations?
Thanks, Jodi. That's incredibly helpful. Thank you. Charlotte, I'm going to come back to you, and it's a question we've had that I think touches on something you mentioned in your remarks. It's from someone whose son has congenital myotonic dystrophy and is able to walk well, but recently, when not wearing orthotic boots, he walks on tiptoe. Is that common? Is there something that can be done to improve it? And perhaps also, if you wouldn't mind just expanding a bit on what orthotics is. It's not always a term that is known by everybody.
Yeah, so orthotics is a kind of broad term that covers any kind of device that is used to kind of support holding your joint in one position. So an orthotic could be and one of the ones that's most commonly used in myotonic dystrophy is an ankle foot orthosis. So that is a orthotic that sits. So there's lots of different types, and they range from being kind of a soft one that's more like a sock with Velcro used to kind of hold your ankle in one position, or you can get ones made of plastic that go down the back of your calf and underneath your foot to hold your ankle at 90 degrees, or another one that people might have seen is that they have carbon fiber ones, so they often sit down the front of your calf and then twist around and go underneath your foot and your ankle, and they all provide different levels of support, and people will need different options at different parts of their disease. We often start with the kind of softer versions that maybe use Velcro. One of the challenges in myotonic dystrophy is to put on these devices. You often have to have quite good dexterity in your hands to be able to slide them on like a sock, or to pull the Velcro nice and tight. And we know in myotonic dystrophy that the weakness in the hand grip and the wrists can impact somebody's ability to be able to put on an orthotic device themselves, and they might need to ask for kind of help from a family member or a caregiver to be able to do that. The kind of frustrating thing about the orthotics devices is the majority of them you have to use while you're wearing a shoe, and I know a lot of people don't wear shoes inside the house, and especially over the pandemic where people have been at home more, they've probably been wearing their orthotics a little bit less. You can also get splints and things for your hands as well, if people are getting kind of loss of movement or kind of contractures where their joints are getting stiff in their hands. We can use orthotic devices and splints for the hands to kind of stretch those out. And in kind of regards to the question, that's quite difficult. I mean, I imagine he may be walking on his toes because he's got quite a bit of tightness around his calves, and that could be because we know in myotonic dystrophy often one of the kind of main places that people get weakness is the lifting up of their ankles, what we'd call ankle dorsiflexion. So when you lift up, and then you can often trip on your feet when you're walking, and that could be a reaction to that. Sometimes when you're wearing your orthotics, you get so used to being in them that when you take them off, it's very difficult to kind of get the same style of walking. It might be worth chatting with the orthotics team that gave the device whether there's an option for anything to wear indoors when he's maybe not wearing his shoes, because there are a number of things that could be tried.
Brilliant, thanks, Charlotte. That's really helpful. We've had a question I think covers two areas. I think one of them, Jodi, I'll come to you first, which is around bouts of hiccups. Is that something that's common with myotonic dystrophy, or is that sort of separate issue?
Yeah, it's probably not one for. It's a good question, because I guess hiccups is often sometimes associated with eating and drinking, maybe too quickly, but maybe one that I'd default to Chris on, actually, because it's not something that I'm commonly come across. Chris, any suggestions?
So the first, thanks, Jodi. The first question is, are they on NIV, non-invasive ventilation? So one of the commonest causes is with a mask for breathing that puts too much air. Actually, Charlotte may want to comment on this. Too much air into the stomach, and the stomach expands, and then that can cause a reaction with the diaphragm, and you start to hiccup. We have got a number of patients who do have hiccups with myotonic dystrophy independently of being on NIV and that air pressure buildup in the stomach. And I'm not sure what's going on there. I don't know whether it's a chance association or whether it's part of the condition. We really just don't understand it, sadly. So I guess the first question is the individual on NIV? And if they're not, they probably need to go and see someone who's an expert in hiccups. There are some rare causes of perpetual hiccups with no obvious cause in the brain, in the chest, under the diaphragm, and the breathing muscle between the abdomen and the thorax. So it is worth getting investigated. But there's a group of people who have intractable hiccups of no known cause, and then the management is quite difficult. So I'd go from that angle. So the first dichotomy is to decide is the individual on NIV, and then go from there. That's a long-winded answer, Robert, without knowing the specifics.
No, thank you, Chris. It's always the risk of these sessions, because we get so many great questions come in, but yeah, you always want to kind of find out more in order to give the best answer. The same question actually mentioned bouts of shaking and bouts that can last for up to an hour where someone can't get out of a chair. Again, is that a common common with myotonic dystrophy, and why might that be? Or again, is that something to be investigated with a different specialist who knows the individual better?
Shall I take that?
Oh yeah, sorry, if you don't mind, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So bouts of shaking with preservation of consciousness, so you don't lose consciousness, would not be typical of myotonic dystrophy. Sometimes, without knowing the specifics of the situation, it's really difficult, Robert. But sometimes people do shake who are weak, so they try and stand up, and one reaction to that is the body starts to shake because it knows it's not going to cope with that, and it's a mechanism that then takes you to sit down again. This is slight conjecture here, Rob. If it's with loss of consciousness, then that's not myotonic dystrophy, and you need to go and see a specialist, not necessarily a myotonic dystrophy specialist, and have that investigated. If it doesn't occur because of weakness, that probably does need some thinking about as well. There's a legion of possibilities, from overactive thyroid to, somebody's in a bad place in their head to, there's lots and lots of causes there without knowing the specifics. Rob.
Great, thank you. And Chris, this may come back to you as well, I'm afraid, but I'm happy to open it up to other panelists. But a very good question has just come in around sort of recovery from operation. So someone who knows there's a general risk for people with myotonic dystrophy around anaesthetic, but actually in terms of recovering from, in this example, it's someone would like to have surgery for a torn ligament, purely for the orthopedic sort of area of it. But is that inadvisable from a recovery point of view because of their myotonic dystrophy, or actually, again, is it not a sort of general advice, and it's down to kind of conversing with the specialist involved? Oh, sorry, Chris, I think you're on mute.
It's not.
Oh. Oh, yes, please, yeah. I think there's a delay on my end. I don't know. Charlotte, are you able to, have you got any thoughts on that while we...
Yeah, I think Chris has got some internet problems maybe. Yeah, I guess it would depend on a kind of individual assessment. I know patients that have been known to us, if they've been going in for any kind of orthopedic or MSK kind of procedure, we've just tried to link in with the physios wherever the procedure is happening. Often after, I don't know what kind of ligament, but often after a procedure like that, you're linked in for physiotherapy via that orthopedic department, and there's a kind of period of rehab, that kind of general rehab that people would do, say if it's a knee ligament replacement or things like that. I guess I would just suggest that person informs the team that they do have myotonic dystrophy, and it just depends kind of how the weakness and things is affecting. And if you have a local physiotherapist who knows you and knows about your myotonic dystrophy to link in. I've linked in with physios in different areas and just explained how the myotonic dystrophy might impact the rehab and how somebody might need a couple more sessions, or it might be that there's certain exercises that they might struggle with. But I wouldn't say it's a blanket no for the kind of after rehab. Obviously, the considerations will need to be had about the anaesthetic procedure, and discussing that with somebody who kind of knows the condition, and the anaesthetist will need to be aware that the person has myotonic dystrophy as part of their pre-op assessment.
Thank you, Charlotte. That's really helpful. We're sort of into the final minutes now, and I'm going to abuse the sort of chair's privilege. What's come across a lot is that importance of referring between different levels of support for people in different types of disciplines. So just be fascinated to hear how you guys work as a multidisciplinary team, and how is that sort of package of support built around people? Is it a lot to do with communication between professionals, or how do you guys sort of manage it?
I think we're incredibly lucky here to have the Neuromuscular Complex Care Centre, which all of us can access, and we communicate a lot between each other, whether patients have been in a physiotherapy clinic or a speech therapy clinic. Jodi and I run a joint clinic together. We'll often assess patients together if we feel like it's needed on the neuromuscular unit, or Susan, for example, will come and join me in my physio clinic if I feel that there's kind of any needs that she might be able to support with. And I guess we just keep a really open line of communication. We have a great electronic record system here, so we can communicate with each other within that. Thinking about kind of communication with outside professionals, so a lot of our patients don't live in London, they might live further away, and I think it's making sure you keep an open communication with other healthcare professionals that might be involved more locally. And I know we've done kind of video consultations with local community physiotherapists who maybe wanted some advice about how to manage myotonic dystrophy. And I think over the last year or so, with kind of video things becoming much more prevalent, it's something that we've definitely jumped on, and we've been doing a lot more. So I would suggest to people, if they feel like they want their local physio or speech therapist or nurse to link in with their specialist centre, that's something that we're very open, and we're happy to communicate and link in with them. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything into that.
I saw Susan come off. And Susan, I guess the challenge for your role is that you may have to field questions about everything related to someone's condition. So is that how you do it, really? Just when you attend clinics alongside Charlotte, but also just sort of keeping abreast and in communication with colleagues?
Yeah, I get questions about all sorts of things that aren't necessarily my expertise, but I link in really closely with Charlotte and Jodi and the team on the NMCCC. So even questions about the heart and things like that. So we've got the cardiology team, so I can link in with them, and everyone's really accessible to contact if there's any questions that I can't answer myself.
Brilliant, thank you. And Jodi, have you got anything to add in about your sort of role on an MDT approach?
No, I think everyone needs a Susan on their team, because Susan absolutely is the hub of getting all the communications. And I think, our role as an MDT is sometimes to take those from Susan and say, let me help with those things, because I know how incredibly busy she is. But I think the nice thing about working in a team like this is that you don't have to wait for formal referrals. There isn't a day that goes by without an email or a communication from somebody about somebody with a neuromuscular condition, and that's what makes us operate so well.
I think that's a fantastic note to end on. I think everyone needs a Susan on their team probably will be a good quote that we can hand off to Susan. I'll clip that bit of the video for you, Susan. We've come to a close now. I'm conscious there are a couple of questions we didn't manage to get to, but what we will try and do is put something up on the website that covers the questions we weren't able to get to. I'd like to say a huge thanks to all of our panelists. It's always quite strange when we stop these sessions, there's an abrupt end and we don't see you again. So thank you very much to all panelists in both the research session and the latter session. That's been really fascinating, and you've provided some really sort of great insight. Also, I'd like to thank those of you who've joined as attendees, and thank you for your questions and comments throughout. They've really helped to drive the session forward. A reminder that you can see the recordings of this session and all other sessions as they're delivered through our website, and we'll also be in touch shortly with a survey to gather some feedback on the session, which will be really valuable to help us build future sessions. So yeah, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Thank you.